Another tool that we have in the pottery area is our clay recycling slab. So after a bunch of trimmings have collected in this bucket or in your own personal bucket, you might want to reuse them and turn them back into usable clay. Now, bear in mind that this is only good for greenware. Once it's been put through a bisque firing, that clay is no longer recyclable. But for greenware that hasn't been fired yet, whether it's wet slip or it's dried, it can be recycled. For the wet slip and the stuff that never dried out, you can just keep that in the bucket and then kind of mush it around with your hands until it's one wet mass. For the parts that are closer to being dried, like say this little broken pot here, what you want to do is make sure it dries out completely first and then break it up into smaller parts with your hand or with a hammer and put it into a trimmings bucket, either this one or your own, and let it sit for a few hours or overnight so that that dry clay can become wet again and dissolve into the rest of the trimmings and the slip. It's important to note that this will happen much faster once your pieces of clay are already dry. So if it's still soft to the touch, then it'll take much longer to dissolve than if it's dry. So that's a little counterintuitive, but there you go. You want to make sure your pieces are dry and broken up into small pieces before trying to re-dissolve them. So then once it is in your bucket and all dissolved, it looks kind of like this. You can smush it around with your hands, but it's all soft. You want to pour any water off the top. There's no sense in, trying to have extra water to evaporate away. So you pour that off the top until you're just left with your slip mass. And then you're going to take that and you're going to put it onto the clay recycling slab. And what is going to happen is the water is going to evaporate off the top and get sucked into the clay from the bottom. And the bottom is open here, so hopefully that moisture can evaporate. And then, every day or a few days, what you can do is turn it over to expose different sides of it to the clay to help suck the water out. And then hopefully within a few days, you will be left with usable clay again, which you'll bring over to the normal wedging table and wedge until it's nice usable clay again. Some notes for using this: make sure, this is a community tool, so make sure to use it for no more than 1 week. And don't forget to label it, so you can just stick a label right here so that we know whose clay is on there. Anything that's left on here past that time will just, either get tossed or donated, be available to anyone who wants it. When you're using the slab, don't use any sharp objects while you're scraping up your clay. Using sharp objects could chip up some of the plaster, and then the plaster could get into your clay, and then your clay will explode when it goes in the kiln. So just nothing sharp on the plaster. We don't want to chip anything on it. And similar to the rest of the pottery area, the only clay that should be used on this to avoid contamination is the white cone 6 stoneware. And when you're done, please make sure to wipe this off so it's nice and clean for the next person to use.